Last week, President Biden promised there would be consequences if Vladimir Putin failed to respond and crack down on cyber hacking, which has been targeting the United States. We want to bring into the stream Matt Hayden. He's Exeter's Vice President, Deputy Lead of Government Tech Solutions. We should point out, too, that Matt is a former Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security for Cyber Infrastructure Risk and Resilience at the Department of Homeland Security. I need to take a breath after all of that introduction. But let me ask you, Matt, seriously, tell us, what can the United States do, whether it's President Biden or someone else who's president, when you respond to a cyber attack? What levers can we pull to punish Russia?
Well, that deterrence can be both seen and unseen. We have, as you mentioned, several levers in the national security windows where that could be immigration. We could talk about visas. We could talk about sanctions via Treasury. We can work with like-minded countries to come to agreements through the UN. All those diplomatic cards are on the table. And then we throw in the unseen options in which we leverage our pretty impressive offensive cyber capabilities that target and go after the infrastructure that these criminals are using to impose these ransomware costs on our critical infrastructure.
Matt, I want to ask, is the onus, or how much of the onus, is ultimately on the U.S. government to step in and prevent and respond to these attacks? And how much of it is also on private sector companies to ensure that they're using encryption, patching software, and adding their own cybersecurity protocols to avoid these attacks?
We have a confluence of two things. You have a cyber hygiene level that's not strong enough to protect industry, and, well, a market through these cryptocurrency payments that's creating this kind of criminal enterprise around this. The government itself has the ability to do best practices and to protect its own systems with the resources they have, but they don't have the ability to protect the entire private sector. That's where these partnerships come in, where we start talking about a model of collective defense. This is where CISA and other groups, such as within Homeland Security and the FBI and others, partner together to work with industry to both understand the threats that are against them and to leverage what tools are out there to identify where vulnerabilities may be and to get those patched and to really have a strong footing for cyber protection in place. That includes things like backups and making sure that we've got the right measures in place.
But the fastest thing to do would be the old movie Trading Places, when they say the way you hurt rich people is you make them poor. Wouldn't the way to hurt Vladimir Putin be for our cyber forces here in the United States to somehow freeze his bank assets? He's one of the wealthiest people in the world. We could get into how he stole his own country's wealth, but wouldn't that be the way to respond? Make him poor.
Imposing costs is the model. And so whether that's sanctions on those close to the Kremlin or the Kremlin itself, that's a card that is on the table. When we start talking about sanctions, whether it be to industries or to actual financial systems that are within Russia itself, those are items that are considered from our national security conversation as options to escalate as this conversation proceeds. Right now, where we've had our conversations have been with Russia on where we see those hard lines of impugning and disrupting critical infrastructure, such as our energy sector, our food sector, and taking advantage of these supply chain attacks from criminal networks. And these conversations that Biden is having and this administration is having with the Kremlin are important to communicate that we aren't going to take this and that our actions are going to be swift. And that's what has to be a part of it, is that imposing cost conversation.
And what do you think the holdout really is within the Biden administration when it comes to not necessarily having taken these harder line stances just yet with Russia?
I think there's a lot of unseen operations that are going on. I think we can put some good faith in Ann Neuberger and her team, as well as some folks over at the State Department. They're doing a lot behind the scenes that we're just not seeing. There's communications that are going through a lot of these channels. At the same time, there are offensive opportunities that may be taken that we just won't know about in the public space. So it's not that there's not something being done. It's just not something being publicly done. And that's almost an escalation in itself, is to start moving these public channels open. So the administration's taken the proper steps, but they're going to have to keep making those steps and get more aggressive to get this to stop.
The company is Exeter. The Vice President and Deputy Lead of Government Tech Solutions is Matt Hayden. We appreciate your being here. When we come back, we're going to count down.